Hey everyone! Today we are taking a look and kind of finishing up our conversation about race ethnicity, and we always end out our units by taking a look at what are the politics involved? What are those major landmark shifts when it comes to policy, and how does it relate to the topic that we're on? So we're going to dive deep into some of the specific court cases relating around this issue. So just know, when we get into talking about race and politics, most of the time we're going to see our major shifts occurring coming out of Supreme Court cases. So our Supreme Court is the judicial branch. Okay, so they're the ones that are deciding if laws are constitutional. These people are appointed by the president, they serve for life, and they are the top court in the United States. So they can overturn rulings by previous judges, whether at the state level or lower court levels. And throughout our history as a country, there have been many issues and court cases that addressed the issues surrounding race. Okay, so what happens is that these court cases are going to start out at a state level, they're going to start out in a minor federal court level, and they're going to work their way up if people keep on raising the issue or not agreeing with past judges. So the Supreme Court will take up a court case if they know that there's going to be a landmark shift in how policy is being looked at. So most of what we're looking at today is court cases. So I just wanted to give you the understanding of where are these decisions coming from. When I reference court cases, why is it such a big deal? Court cases, when it's finalized by the Supreme Court, it becomes the law of the land. It is what we call precedent, where moving forward, all legislation, all court cases in the future from that point on have to follow the ruling handed down by the judges. So when I say that it's a landmark choice, it literally is changing the direction that the future is going to go from that point on. So we're going to start out. Some of you may have heard about this case before, some of you maybe haven't. This is the court case called Dred Scott v. Sandford. So just a little bit of background. Mr. Dred Scott was born a slave, 1799. Okay, so we have created the Constitution at this point in our history. We do still have slavery ongoing in our country, and he was owned by Mr. John Emerson. Okay, so if you're looking at the images here, on the right we have Dred Scott, on the left we have John Emerson, his original slave owner. So this man on the left, Emerson, he routinely took Scott across different state lines. He traveled for his work, and Scott would go with him across different state lines. And in the United States, not every state was a slave state. Okay, so primarily in the South, where you've got the cotton economy, you're going to have more pro-slave states. Whereas more in the North, you're going to have states that have outlawed slavery already or never were considered a slave state. So Emerson is taking Scott with him for his job as he's traveling around the country, and he ends up taking him to Missouri, which is at this time not a slave state. Okay, and so Emerson actually ends up leaving Scott with his wife Harriet back in St. Louis, and he goes home. Okay, so he leaves Scott and his wife behind to handle his business dealings in that state. He doesn't stay with them, and Scott and his wife actually end up staying put. They don't try to run away, none of that. Well, Emerson ends up passing away and gifts Scott and his wife to his daughter. Okay, and so his daughter at that point wanted Scott and Harriet to come back home to her. And so at that point, that's when we see Scott and his wife filing for separate lawsuits for their freedom. Because while they were continuing to work business with their previous owner, Emerson, they felt as though, based on different laws at the time and different court rulings, that they had their freedom because they had been transported across state lines and were now residing in a free state. So they thought of themselves as free. So they took this issue to the courts. And this issue went back and forth, first at the state level and then at the federal level, and it ended up going all the way up to the United States Supreme Court. Again, that highest level of court here in the United States, they have the end say in all issues. So the Supreme Court took up the issue and ruled that all people of African descent, free or enslaved, were not citizens. And so because they weren't citizens, they had no right to sue in the first place. So they didn't even take a look really at the issue of slavery across state lines. They just took up issue with the fact that Dred Scott was a previous slave. Hold on. Sorry, I thought we were going to get an announcement overhead. So Dred Scott was a previous slave. They didn't take up any issue with any of this. Instead, what they were concerned about was the fact that because he was of African descent, he was not a citizen, and citizens don't have a right to sue here in the United States. So this was a affirmation for the fact that slavery was still legal no matter where you traveled to in the United States. So even if you had a free state, say many states in the north, even if a slave got to that state, say they ran away or they traveled there with their owners, they were still not considered equal people, right? And so this, again, addresses the issue of like, well, if they're not citizens, why are we counting their population in terms of the Three-Fifths Compromise? Now, if you don't know what the Three-Fifths Compromise, it was a big debate that occurred during the Constitutional Convention where we were considering how do we count population for people representing us in Congress, and they ended up looking at our slave population and saying, yep, we're going to count them, but they aren't fully considered the same as white citizens at this time, and so we're only going to count them as 3/5 of a person. And that's how we're going to look at that southern population in terms of getting representatives in the House of Reps for Congress. Next, we're taking a look at the court case of Plessy v. Ferguson. This occurred in 1896, so we're looking at after the Civil War, after the Emancipation Proclamation, 13th, 14th Amendments. Okay, so know that that stuff has already happened. It's already occurred. So we enter into Louisiana, where they have introduced a new law where you have separate train cars. You have a black train car and you have a white train car. So Homer Plessy was actually an activist. He wasn't just this random stranger getting onto a train car. He was an activist, and because he knew that he had some type of African heritage to him, he was 7/8 Caucasian, 1/8 African American, he actually presented very much as a Caucasian. He took up the issue and wanted to test out the constitutionality. Was he going to get arrested based on this law? And if he was, could he take this through the courts? Because again, didn't agree with what was going on. So he took up the issue, got onto a whites-only train car, again in Louisiana, so this is in a southern state. And when he got on, he was asked to move to another car, and he refused to. Okay, and so he was arrested, and he sued on the basis of his arrest, and he didn't agree with being arrested. So again, the issue of his arrest based on this law of separate train cars is what was going through the courts. So it ended up going up all the way to the Supreme Court. Again, they ruled, taking a look at the 14th Amendment of Equal Protection, that because the amenity of a train service was being offered at the end of the day, that it was still considered equal for the population. So you can separate based on race, according to the Supreme Court in 1896, as long as you are still offering the same amenities or the same opportunities, same things. And this court case established that idea of being separate but equal. Okay, so this is what's going to enter into our era of Jim Crow laws, where we see separate amenities like bathrooms, drinking fountains, schools, housing, all of these issues primarily based off of race, again because the Supreme Court upheld this original decision. Moving on further, we're taking a look now at Korematsu versus the United States. Now, we've taken a look primarily at the treatment of African Americans. We've taken a look at the idea of slavery here in the United States, but again, this is a unit over race, so I think it's really important for you to understand different court cases dealing with different race and ethnicities. So taking a look at Korematsu versus the United States, this was an executive order, kind of like law, that doesn't go through Congress. It only is created by the president. The Executive Order 9066 by President FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Okay, he was the president during the World War II time period of our country. And what happened, real quick background in case you haven't taken United States history real quick, during World War II, the United States stayed pretty much out of the issues of Europe up until our island or military base on Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, was bombed by a Japanese air raid. And it killed a lot of people, destroyed a lot of different ships, and it was the official moment where the United States said, yep, we are now involved in this war. So that's how the United States got involved, 1941. And so after that time, there was this fear based on race. People heard about the destruction that occurred in Pearl Harbor, knew that it had been executed by Japanese military forces, and so the United States responded to race at this time because of their fears after this event. And because of this executive order, the United States government ended up forcing over 100,000 Japanese Americans into internment camps here in the United States. So here in this image, I know it's a little bit blurry, but you can kind of see what I'm talking about, where there was a fence, they were enclosed in the fence, there were these cabin-like buildings, they had a mess hall where they all ate together, families were living with other families in these mess halls, and they were forcefully removed from their homes in order to be moved into these internment camps. Again, because of that fear of, you look like the people who just attacked us. Okay, so what ends up happening with this specific case is that Fred Korematsu, who is the son of a Japanese immigrant, right, so he's a U.S. citizen, Fred Korematsu was bound by law, according to this executive order, to report in order to go to an internment camp. Well, he didn't show up, meaning that he then had a warrant out for his arrest. And so he eventually was arrested after not showing up for that forced relocation. And he sued on the basis of his arrest, which was stemming from this executive order. So the courts were looking at the executive order. Is it constitutional for us to have internment camps during wartime based on the circumstances of what is going on? And so it ended up going through the Supreme Courts, and they ruled that yes, this was legal. And this policy ended up lasting for 3 years during the time of World War II. Okay, so this is a really big issue that happened to a lot of Asian Americans, and a lot of them ended up suing the government later. And when I say later, I mean like the 70s, 80s, 90s, even up to the 2000s, for damages to their family because of what happened to them during the World War II internment camps of Asian Americans. Moving on in history, next we have our Civil Rights Act and our Voting Rights Act. A lot of us may have heard about these already. We've talked about some of those big moments in our class already for the last couple of weeks, but just to revisit so you know, these were landmark policies. It was law that was coming out of our federal government because of issues that were surrounding race. So we have first our Civil Rights Act. And this was a big moment. Leading up to this, we had a lot of bus boycotts. We were dealing with segregation and desegregation issues following Brown versus Board, right? So our schools are starting to integrate again, but there's still this societal barrier that is keeping different races from being able to get jobs or being able to get an education, again, because of different identities that they held. Okay, so the Civil Rights Act comes out in 1964. To give you perspective, my grandmother had been alive for 20 years at this point. This law was only passed 2 years before my mom and dad were born. So again, a lot of times we think as students that this issue happened a long, long time ago, and that's just not quite true. So we got our Civil Rights Act, which outlawed the discrimination on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. And it required equal access to public places and employment. So many times now, if you are going to apply for a job and you feel as if you didn't get the job because of one of these factors, you can bring that up in court, or if you've lost your job because of one of these factors. Okay? So next, we're taking a look at our Voting Rights Act. This is a year after 1965. This outlawed literacy tests and prohibited the denial of right to vote based on the account of race or color. Same with poll taxes, where it gave the U.S. Attorney the power to investigate these things, which later were outlawed. So during our era of Jim Crow, a lot of different times when people went to go to register to vote as U.S. citizens, they were asked, sometimes based on race, to complete a specific test. Like, can you read? Can you write? Can you pay in order to apply for a voter registration? Which, when you look at, again, that issue of systematic racism, Jim Crow, access to things based on your generational family experiences, most of the time the people who were being denied the right to vote were people of color. And so it became much of a race issue, and truly as citizens, it's our right to vote, and it's our way of getting involved with decision making that's later going to affect our lives. So if you have a whole race of people not able to vote, your lawmaking abilities are not going to be equal, and it's not going to help over maybe at this time 20% of your population. So again, you are discriminating based off sex at this time previous to 1965. Like I said, I like to bring up different issues on ethnicity and race, not just African Americans, so I wanted to make sure that you guys got a view into some of the different back and forths that have happened with Native Americans. Now, keep in mind that Native Americans did not become citizens for their own land until after the 14th Amendment, where if you're born on U.S. soil, if you're born in the United States, you become a U.S. citizen. So previous to this, Native Americans who had been here before these Europeans, these white Europeans, they weren't citizens on the land. They didn't have a voice in any of the law-making decisions that were occurring, even though they lived here in this country. So keep that in mind. There's these long-standing abuses that have happened to the people who were here before a lot of white people. So bring us up to more recent era, 2004. Okay, so at this time, I was 9 years old, and this is the issue of United States versus Lara, where we see the back and forth happening, where originally Native American tribes are considered their own government entity, where if a Native American commits a crime, it's going to be handled in their tribe's court, and the sentencing is going to come down from the tribe's court. Well, the United States ends up deciding, no, we're also going to try people because you're living within our country. So it's this, again, back and forth of, are you citizens? Do you have a voice? Yet we're going to also hold you accountable even though you're not quite considered citizens. And it's just this continuous back and forth between Native American tribal lands and government entities of tribes with the United States government. So based on this court case, we end up seeing that the United States decides that they can try Native Americans in the United States courts, even if that person has already been tried and given a sentence in their tribal court. So this brings up the issue of taking a look at our Fifth Amendment, where you cannot be subjected to double jeopardy. You can't be tried twice for the same crime. And essentially, this court case set up the system where you can be tried twice based off of the same crime. So this creates more confusion about what are tribal rights versus U.S. law, and this issue of double jeopardy. To give you guys some understanding maybe about double jeopardy, that would be like if you were late to class and I punished you by giving you an E for the day on that assignment. And then you were also written up and had to get a detention. Okay, so that would be over the same issue, yet you're getting two separate punishments over the same moment. Okay. Getting us more into current day issues, I wanted to take a look at affirmative action. Okay, so this is a policy that is ongoing. I actually yesterday reached out to our superintendent and our human resources personnel to see how are we meeting these goals? How are you bound by law based on affirmative action? So we are practicing this here in our town, in our schools. And affirmative action is that practice of favoring individuals who belong to groups that have previously been discriminated in history. Okay, so when this came up, it was again a policy to try to remedy some of those generational injuries that have happened because of the different instances that we've already talked about in this class, such as slavery, Jim Crow laws, access to voting, things like that, again, based on race. So it's a way to make it or help, again, it's a remedy, not a solution, it's a remedy to help have equal opportunities among all citizens in the United States. So it was it was designed to eliminate unlawful discrimination and remedy prior discrimination. Now, how is this enforced? Any business or employment place who receives federal funding has to prove that they have been practicing affirmative action. Okay, so here in our school, we as a school receive federal funds. So we receive funds from the United States government. And if our school was shown to not be able to provide explanation or proof that we are using affirmative action when employing our teachers and staff, we would lose out on that federal funding. And that would take a huge chunk out of being able to operate as a school building. So that's not just schools, that may be other federal companies, and police departments, county departments, all of these different areas that are having influence from the federal government. That's how they are going to be enforcing it. So where are we at today with race issues and looking at politics? Taking a look first, we've got our National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, or the NAACP. This is a civil rights group. This is also an interest group, meaning that they have people that will make donations to them. They will go and speak on behalf of a group of people when talking to legislators. They may be a group that provides documents or evidence when getting ready for court cases and looking at those different things. So their mission is to secure the political, educational, social, and economic equality of rights. Another thing that is, if you go to their website and take a look at their mission statement, they want to eliminate race-based discrimination, which is a great thing. Okay, we don't want to be having race-based discrimination. Sorry for that typo there. Okay, so this group has been around since 1909. They've done a lot of great work when taking a look at different court cases and ensuring the advancement of colored people here in the United States. Finally, as you guys probably know and you've heard in the news, different areas, is that we have a major movement happening here in the United States called Black Lives Matter. And this group was founded in 2013. This was the year that I graduated high school. Again, trying to give you perspective of the timelines of even people who are alive and in front of you every day. This group was founded in 2013 in the response of the death of Trayvon Martin. Trayvon Martin was a black teenager who was going to the gas station and ended up getting shot by one of his neighbors who was a part of a neighborhood watch. And it brought up a lot of issues of like stand your ground laws, different ethnicity violence against each other, and how the courts are going to handle court cases for people who have committed violence against people of color and whether they're actually getting full sentences or not. And so that's leading us into all of these issues that we're seeing here today. And it kind of gives that background of where the frustrations and upset feelings come from when you see these movements happening and these different marches taking place. Because this is happening here like these movements, these marches by Black Lives Matter are happening in our state, in our local area. I know early this summer we had one here in Kalamazoo, which is where I live. I believe there was one that occurred in Albion by a small group of students as well. So this is an issue that I think is going to be one of those defining moments for generations to come. So, with that being said, what you're going to do for me today is I would really like you to take a look at the NAACP website as well as the Black Lives Matter website, learn about their missions, learn about their causes, what they've been involved in, legal issues, who are their supporters, things like that. Again, you don't have to agree with everything, but it's important to know the information behind these moments so that way you're able to have conversations and help facilitate those hard moments. So with that being said, please reach out if you have any questions or concerns.